So, you sent this piece over to us, Why Teaching Fails. Hidden Truth about real knowledge transfer in education
Yeah.
by Shiva Narayan Taxila.
Right.
And I gotta say, just the title alone
Yeah.
kind of gets those wheels turning,
Yeah.
Like, makes you think about all that time we all spent in classrooms.
Totally, totally. I mean, it really gets at something so fundamental, like how do we actually learn?
Yeah.
And does the way we've been taught really line up with that?
Right.
And that's what we want to unpack in this deep dive.
Right.
What is Takshila's argument about, why traditional teaching methods might not be as effective as we think they are?
Yeah, exactly. The text basically poses this central question. Why does the teaching system, why does it seem to fall short sometimes in delivering knowledge that's really lasting and usable,
Right.
And I bet you, listener, have thought about this at some point in your own education too, right?
Oh, definitely. And what I think is really cool is that the text doesn't just sort of point out the problem. It actually proposes a pretty fundamental shift in perspective, right? Like, instead of just focusing on teaching, Takshila is really advocating for this idea of true knowledge transfer.
Yeah, okay.
And they even introduced this concept called system learnography as a potential solution, or at least, a way forward.
Yeah.
It's a bold idea, which is why I think it's so interesting to explore.
For sure. And listener, this deep dive should really give you some good insight into what the text suggests about how your brain actually learns best.
Yeah.
And it might even illuminate some of those moments in your own education, where things clicked or maybe where they didn't quite click. Right.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's get started. Let's unpack this first big idea.
Okay.
What the author calls the illusion of teaching as knowledge transfer.
Right. Yeah, this is where the text really starts to challenge some of our assumptions, I think.
Okay.
The core argument here is that, we tend to think that when a teacher presents information, that it automatically gets absorbed, right?
Right.
And understood by the student in a lasting way.
Right.
But Takshila is suggesting it's not quite that simple.
Right.
Like, it's like thinking that if water flows in one end of a pipe, the same amount will just automatically come out the other end, perfectly intact.
Right.
It doesn't quite work that way.
So what's the first reason why this illusion exists?
Well, they talk about how passive learning, especially in those traditional classroom settings, often leads to really weak memory pathways in the brain.
Right.
Think about all those lectures where you're just sitting there listening, maybe taking notes.
Yeah.
They say this primarily engages verbal processing,
Right.
which is surprisingly slow and not super effective for long-term memory.
Okay, so this is why it can be so hard to recall stuff from those lectures years ago, huh?
Exactly. And what's even more interesting, I think, is that they talk about how our brains are actually wired for something else.
Okay.
They're wired for what's called procedural knowledge.
Right.
This learning by doing and also learning through experiences that involve our bodies, our motor skills.
Okay.
Think about, like, if you want to learn a new recipe, you're going to learn better if you actually do it rather than just read about it.
Right. Well,
right?
Yeah, sure. For sure.
That's the idea.
Yeah. So they're saying, like, just listening, that doesn't activate the motor circuits.
Exactly.
In our brain, that's important for retention.
Exactly. And without some kind of hands-on experience or active engagement, these concepts stay kind of abstract and theoretical, and they just kind of fade away.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how much I really remember from all those lectures.
All those hours.
Yeah, wow.
Of just passively listening.
Okay, so then what's their second point about why teaching can sometimes fail?
So the second thing they bring up is how this reliance on being taught can actually weaken your ability to learn on your own. Right. Because if you're always being given the information, what happens to your skills in seeking it out, processing it, mastering it independently.
Right. Yeah.
So they're saying students almost become these passive recipients of information. Right. You're not really actively involved in that process of discovery and figuring things out. Yeah. And they argue this can have some pretty significant consequences.
Yeah.
They talk about underdeveloped problem-solving skills.
Okay.
Because you haven't really had to struggle and find solutions on your own.
Right.
And also potentially a reduced sense of curiosity.
Okay.
Because you're not, that natural drive to explore and learn might be dampened by always having the answers just given to you.
Yeah. It makes me think, Like, what's the balance, right?
Right, exactly.
Between, like, guidance and the freedom to learn independently,
Yeah, and if you're always told what to do and how to think, are you really developing those muscles for lifelong learning?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that's the question.
Okay, so then what's the third challenge they point out?
The third challenge is the classic one-size-fits-all approach,
Oh, right.
which kind of ignores that we all learn at our own pace
Yeah,
and in
yeah.
our own way.
Of course.
Right. Think about it. Maybe you're a visual learner.
Right.
Maybe you learn best by doing
Totally.
a standardized curriculum can't really cater to all those differences.
No, for sure. And what happens, they say, because of this?
Well, they say that, if you're a faster learner, you might find yourself under-challenged.
Right.
But no, not really reaching your full potential.
Right.
And then, on the flip side, if you need a little more time to grasp a concept,
Yeah.
you might struggle to keep up and, maybe feel like you're constantly falling behind.
Oh, for sure.
It's that lack of personalized learning
Right.
that really addresses those individual needs.
Yeah. Okay. So we've talked about why this text thinks traditional teaching can fall short.
Right.
But now let's talk about the flip side of that, right?
Right.
What they propose is this hidden truth, which is how knowledge transfer actually occurs in the brain.
Right.
And it sounds like it's a much more like active process
It is.
than just receiving information.
Yeah, they're moving away from this passive reception model to one where the learner is really actively involved in processing the information,
Okay.
storing it effectively, and then being able to retrieve it
Okay.
when they need it.
Yeah.
And it's about more than just listening or reading, right?
Yeah.
It's a whole different way of thinking about it.
Okay. So what is this active process?
Well, a really important element is this idea of task-based learning
Okay.
and the formation of what's called procedural memory.
Okay.
The idea is that your brain really locks onto knowledge
Yeah.
when you're actually doing something with it. Think back to a skill you've mastered.
Yeah.
You probably didn't just read about it.
Right.
You practiced it, right?
Totally. So what's happening in the brain when we do this?
So they talk about how this engages the motor cortex,
Okay.
the part of your brain that controls actions, right?
Okay.
And also the basal ganglia, which are involved in learning through repetition and practice,
Okay.
like forming habits, essentially.
So it's like if you're learning a new software program,
Right.
it's the clicking and typing like over and over.
Exactly.
That helps it stick.
Exactly. It's those repeated actions that really solidify your understanding.
Right.
Right. And it's not just about, knowing about something. It's about knowing how to do it.
Yeah, I get it. So then where does the hippocampus come in? I always thought that was like the memory part of the brain.
It is, but they point out that the hippocampus,
Okay.
Which we associate with memory,
Yeah.
especially for like facts and spatial information,
Mhm.
yeah, it's less effective at long-term retention of complex knowledge without that reinforcement from the motor cortex
I see.
and the basal ganglia.
So it's like the hippocampus is like taking notes,
Yeah, you could think of it that way.
but the doing is like the studying, the rehearsal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so then this leads us to this concept they call brainpage development.
Yes.
And that comes from this whole system learnography idea, right?
Exactly. And this is presented as like the science behind how lasting knowledge is actually built
Okay.
in your brain.
Okay, so what is brainpage development exactly?
So they describe it as this process
Yeah.
where knowledge is stored in a structured, modular way,
Okay.
almost like creating these mental blueprints
Okay.
of academic content.
So it's like my brain is organizing the information like chapters in a book or something?
Yeah, exactly, like a well-organized textbook that you
Oh.
can easily navigate and access.
Right. And they say this is so effective because it involves you interacting with tasks,
Right.
which, like we said, activates that motor knowledge.
Yeah.
And by organizing knowledge into these, brain pages,
Yeah.
it's not just floating around randomly.
Right.
It's structured and accessible.
Okay, so this is a huge departure
It is.
from how we normally think about learning.
Yeah, it really is.
Okay, so let's talk about this system learnography in more detail.
Yeah.
Like, what is this revolutionary approach?
So the central idea here is to shift away from that teacher-centered model,
Okay.
where the teacher is the primary source of information,
Yeah.
to one that really puts the student at
Right.
the heart of the learning process
Okay.
through task-driven activities.
I see.
It's about empowering you to become an active architect of
Right.
your own knowledge.
Okay, so walk me through this system.
All right, so the first component is this task-based learning.
Oh.
They also call it book-to-brain learnography. And this is where instead of just listening to explanations,
Yeah.
you're directly engaging with the source material, like,
Sure.
Books or articles,
Right.
and
Yeah.
extracting knowledge through self-directed tasks.
Okay, and what's the advantage of that?
Well, they argue that it allows for direct knowledge transfer.
Yeah.
You're not getting it filtered through someone else's explanation.
Right.
Your brain has to actively process and make sense of it.
Right.
And as a result, you develop those problem-solving skills.
Okay.
You're not just given answers, you're figuring out how to find them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
So you're saying I could end up with a deeper understanding.
Yeah, and more personalized.
Yeah.
Because it's your own journey.
Okay, cool. So then what's the next part of this system?
So the second part is this really interesting idea of miniature schools
Okay.
and peer learning.
Okay.
So they talk about students working in small collaborative groups.
Yeah.
With more advanced learners taking on the role of small teachers
Okay, interesting.
to guide their peers.
I like that. Yeah. So what's the thinking behind that?
Well, they suggest that this peer-to-peer interaction has benefits for everyone.
Okay.
For the small teacher, explaining the concept solidifies their own knowledge.
Right, because you don't really know something till you can teach it.
Exactly. And for the
Yeah.
student being taught,
Yeah.
it can increase comprehension
Okay.
because it's coming from a peer who
Yeah.
might use more relatable language.
Right.
Plus, it just naturally fosters teamwork
Yeah.
and promotes autonomy.
Okay.
Right? You're learning with and from each other,
Right.
not solely relying on that one authority figure.
I really like that.
Yeah.
So what's the third piece of this system learnography?
So the third key element is what they call cyclizide rehearsal for memory consolidation.
Okay.
Sometimes also referred to as thalamic cyclizide rehearsal, or TCR.
Right.
And this involves strategically revisiting learned material
Right.
to strengthen those neural connections and make it really stick.
Gotcha. So it's like if there's a path in the woods,
Yeah,
you got to keep walking it.
exactly.
It gets overgrown.
Exactly. That's a great analogy.
Okay. So they're saying this can eliminate forgetting.
That's what they claim, that it can eliminate the forgetting curve
Wow.
through this subconscious brain activation.
Interesting.
And by regularly revisiting the material, it just becomes more deeply ingrained,
Right.
more resistant to fading over time.
So I wouldn't have to cram as much, basically.
The idea, yeah.
Okay, so their main message seems to be that we need to move beyond this traditional view of teaching.
Exactly.
It's like the only way to learn.
They're arguing that we need to shift our focus
Yeah.
from what teachers are doing
Right.
to what students are actually learning
Right.
and how they can apply that knowledge
Right.
in real-world situations.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So they want schools to adopt this task-based learning and brain page development.
Yes, they're really advocating for educational institutions to consider these brain-centered strategies for creating more effective learning experiences.
Right. Okay, so let's do a quick recap for our listener.
Okay.
So why teaching fails? This text argues that traditional passive learning
Right.
often falls short because of, well, one, it creates weak memory pathways.
Right.
Two, it makes us dependent on being taught.
Uh-huh.
And three, that one-size-fits-all approach
Right.
doesn't work for everyone.
Exactly.
So instead, they say real knowledge transfer happens through active engagement,
Yes.
particularly this task-based learning,
Right.
which, like we said, activates those motor circuits.
And leads to this brain page development.
Yeah, and they proposed this whole system, right, called system learnography,
Right.
which has those three main components.
Yes.
Task-based learning,
Right.
the miniature schools and peer learning,
Uh-huh.
and the cyclizide rehearsal to
Right.
strengthen the memory.
Ex-
And their big point is that we should focus on what the student learns
Yes.
and their ability to use that knowledge.
Right. The outcomes.
And they think schools should use task-based learning and brain page development.
Exactly. Those brain-centered strategies.
Okay, so listener, I want you to think about this for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Do the challenges that we talked about
Yeah.
with traditional teaching, do those resonate with you?
Yeah. Think back to your own experiences.
Yeah.
Were there times when task-based learning or active engagement really helped you get something.
All right, where you really remember it.
Right, where it really stuck.
Yeah.
Because you were actively involved.
And also, the author mentions this Taxilla page
Right.
where you can learn more
Yeah, if you want to dive deeper.
about system learnography and the Taxilla model.
Exactly. It's all there if you're interested.
Yeah, yeah. So it really gives you a lot to think about,
It does.
like maybe the future of education
Yeah.
really is in these more active approaches,
Mhm.
that prioritize knowledge transfer.
Real, lasting,
Yeah.
empowering knowledge transfer.
For sure, for sure. Well, thanks for joining us
Yeah, thanks for listening.
for this deep dive.
It was a great discussion.
It was.